The rain hammered Greenwood Cemetery as mourners gathered around the fresh grave of Marcus Steele Rodriguez, the legendary biker whose Harley had wrapped around an oak tree 3 days earlier. Black leather jackets mixed with cheap suits, creating an uneasy tension between his motorcycle club and the handful of family members who'd bothered to show. That's when 8-year-old Emma broke free from her aunt's grip and sprinted toward the casket, her small voice cutting through the thunder. "He's not dead! He's not dead!" The crowd froze. Emma wasn't just any grieving child. She was the daughter Marcus had hidden from his dangerous world, the little girl who possessed an extraordinary ability that had kept her father's enemies at bay for years. As Emma pressed her tiny hands against the mahogany wood, her eyes rolled back, revealing only white. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. What happened next would force everyone to question everything they thought they knew about life, death, and the mysterious power that ran in the Rodriguez bloodline. But here's what nobody expected. What if Emma was right? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wind died completely. Even the rain seemed to pause mid-fall, droplets hanging in the air like suspended crystal. Emma's small frame began to glow with an ethereal light that made the gathered mourners step backward, some crossing themselves, others reaching for weapons they shouldn't have brought to a funeral. "Jesus Christ!" whispered Tommy Tank Morrison, Marcus's former sergeant-at-arms, his weathered hand instinctively moving toward the .38 tucked beneath his leather vest. "She's doing it again." Aunt Sarah, Marcus's sister, stood paralyzed 20 feet away. She'd seen Emma's gift manifest before, but never like this, never with such raw intensity. The child's dark hair whipped around her face despite the absence of wind, and when she spoke, her voice carried an otherworldly resonance that seemed to echo from the earth itself. "He's trapped," Emma said. Her sightless eyes still rolled back. "They put him somewhere dark, somewhere cold. But he's breathing. He's calling my name." Detective Ray Morrison, Tank's estranged brother and the only cop brave enough to attend, felt his skepticism crack like thin ice. He'd been investigating Marcus Rodriguez for 8 years, always one step behind the Ghost Rider who seemed to vanish whenever the law closed in. The accident report had been clean. Too clean, he now realized. Single vehicle collision, no witnesses, body burned beyond recognition, but dental records confirmed. Case closed, but Emma's words sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the supernatural temperature drop. The bikers were getting restless. Razor Martinez, the club's new president who'd assumed power after Marcus's supposed death, pushed through the crowd with barely concealed anger. "Get that freak kid away from there," he snarled. But as he approached Emma, an invisible force slammed him backward into a marble headstone. "Don't touch her," came a voice from the shadows between the crypts. Everyone turned to see a figure emerging from the mist, tall, lean, wearing a long coat that seemed immune to the rain. Detective Morrison's hand moved to his service weapon, but something about the stranger's presence made him hesitate. "Who the hell are you?" Tank demanded, his own gun now drawn. The stranger ignored the question, walking directly to Emma with purposeful strides. "Little sister," he said softly, his voice carrying a familiar warmth that made Sarah gasp. "You can see him, can't you? You can see where they took our father." Emma's head snapped toward the stranger, her eyes rolling forward to reveal pupils dilated with otherworldly knowledge. "Miguel?" she whispered. "But you're supposed to be dead? Like our father?" Miguel Rodriguez pulled back his hood, revealing a face that was unmistakably Marcus's son, the boy who'd supposedly died in a house fire 5 years earlier. "Seems death isn't as permanent in our family as people think." The gathering erupted in chaos. Tank's gun wavered between Miguel and Razor, while Detective Morrison frantically tried to process what he was witnessing. Sarah collapsed to her knees in the mud, overwhelmed by the return of a nephew she'd mourned for years. But Emma wasn't finished. Her small hand remained pressed against the casket, and through her connection to whatever lay beyond the veil, she began to speak in a voice that was partly her own and partly something else entirely. "He says the betrayal came from inside. He says the real Steele Rodriguez is in the old warehouse on Pier 47, and they're keeping him alive for a reason. Her voice grew stronger, more insistent. He says to trust no one except family. Real family. Blood family. Emma's eyes focused on Reza Martinez with laser intensity. He says you're not who you claim to be. Lightning split the sky, and in that brilliant flash, everyone saw the fear that crossed Reza's face before he pulled a gun and pointed it directly at the 8-year-old girl who had just exposed the biggest deception the Iron Serpent's motorcycle club had ever attempted. The morning after the funeral, Detective Ray Castellanos sat in his Crown Vic outside the Henderson house, nursing his third cup of coffee and watching the drawn curtains for any sign of movement. 24 hours had passed since Emma's outburst at the cemetery, and he couldn't shake the kid's words from his mind. He's not dead. He's hiding. Ray had worked narcotics for 8 years, long enough to know that Marcus Ghost Henderson's death had been too clean, too convenient. The motorcycle accident on Route 47 had left a mangled Harley and enough blood to satisfy the coroner, but no body to speak of. They'd called it a recovery operation rather than a rescue for good reason. The river current was notorious for carrying things downstream, sometimes for miles. His radio crackled. Unit 47. What's your status? Still on surveillance, Ray replied, keeping his voice low. He wasn't supposed to be here. His captain had made it crystal clear that the Henderson case was closed, but something about that little girl's conviction had burrowed under his skin like a splinter. Inside the house, Emma sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, carefully arranging the contents of the shoebox she'd hidden under her bed. Her mother had been drinking wine since breakfast, and her older brother Jake had locked himself in his room with his headphones. Nobody was paying attention to her, which was exactly how she needed it. The box contained everything she'd collected over the past 3 months, the things that proved her daddy was planning something big. There was the gas station receipt from Millfield, 60 miles north, dated 2 days after he'd supposedly died. She'd found it crumpled in the pocket of his leather jacket when her mom wasn't looking. There were the strange phone calls she'd overheard, conversations about going dark and new territory. And there was the map. Emma spread the map across her carpet, smoothing the creases with small, careful fingers. Red circles marked 3 different towns, all of them places she'd never heard of. But it was the handwriting in the margins that made her stomach flutter with nervous excitement, her father's messy scrawls spelling out dates and numbers that didn't make sense to her 8-year-old mind, but felt important nonetheless. A car door slammed outside, and Emma quickly gathered her evidence, stuffing everything back into the box. Through her window, she could see a man in a suit walking up their front path. Not one of her father's biker friends. This one moved differently, with the careful alertness of someone used to danger. Downstairs, Ray knocked twice and waited. When Sarah Henderson opened the door, he was struck by how much the woman had aged in just a few months. Her blonde hair hung limp around hollow cheeks, and her eyes held the glassy sheen of someone drowning her grief in alcohol. Mrs. Henderson, I'm Detective Castellanos. We spoke briefly yesterday at the service. I was hoping I could ask you a few follow-up questions. Sarah's grip tightened on the doorframe. I told you people everything I know. Marcus is dead. The case is closed. It's about Emma's statement. Emma is 8 years old. Sarah's voice cracked slightly. She's confused and grieving. She doesn't understand what death means yet. From the top of the stairs, Emma pressed herself against the banister, straining to hear the conversation. Her heart hammered against her ribs when she heard the detective mention her name. Sometimes children see things adults miss, Ray continued gently. They notice details we overlook. If there's even a chance— There's no chance. Sarah's tone turned sharp, almost desperate. My husband is dead. He died in that accident, and we're trying to move on. I won't have you filling my daughter's head with false hope. Ray studied the woman's face, noting the way her free hand trembled slightly, the defensive set of her shoulders. Mrs. Henderson, if Marcus is alive, if he staged his death, you could be in danger. His associates, the Rivera cartel connections, they don't just disappear because of a fake funeral. The color drained from Sarah's face. Get off my property. If you know something, "I said get off my property." Sarah slammed the door hard enough to rattle the frame. Emma scrambled back to her room as her mother's footsteps echoed up the stairs. She pressed her ear to her bedroom door and listened to her mother's muffled sobs coming from the master bedroom down the hall. Outside, Ray sat in his car for another 20 minutes, watching and thinking. The woman was terrified, that much was obvious, but whether she was afraid because her husband was dead or because he was very much alive remained the question. As he finally pulled away from the curb, Ray missed the small face that appeared briefly in an upstairs window, watching him go with the intense focus of a child who understood far more about secrets than any 8-year-old should. The funeral home's basement felt like a tomb even before they wheeled in the casket. Emma pressed herself against the cold concrete wall, watching through the crack in the storage room door as 3 men in expensive suits gathered around her father's supposed body. "Kid's got a mouth on her," the tallest one said, his voice carrying a slight accent Emma couldn't place, caused quite a scene upstairs. "Children say things," replied the funeral director, Mr. Henley, wringing his hands. "Grief makes them—" "This isn't about grief." The third man stepped closer to the casket, his scarred hands gripping the edge. Marcus was always too clever for his own good. "Question is, how much did he tell the girl?" Emma's breath caught in her throat. They were talking about her father like he was still alive, like the screaming match she'd witnessed 3 days ago between him and Uncle Sal had been real. Not some grief-induced hallucination her mother insisted it was. "The body's been prepared according to your specifications," Henley said, his voice shaking. "Closed casket, no viewing. The burns from the crash make it realistic." Burns. Emma remembered the smell of gasoline and melted plastic when the police brought her father's jacket back. But she also remembered seeing that same jacket hanging in Uncle Sal's garage yesterday, pristine and unmarked. The tall man nodded. "What about the family?" "The wife's sedated, doctor's orders. She hasn't asked questions." Henley paused. "But the girl—" "Yeah, the girl." Scarred hands drummed against the casket. "She's seen something. Kids don't make up details like that." Emma thought about the morning she'd snuck out to follow her father, how she'd watched him meet with strange men behind the warehouse near the docks. She'd been looking for a stray cat that had been hanging around their yard, but instead she'd found her father handing over a thick envelope to someone who definitely wasn't from their neighborhood. "We need to know what Marcus told her," the accented voice continued. "Before this gets messy." The sound of footsteps echoed from the stairs above. Mr. Henley's assistant called down, "The family's arriving for the private viewing." Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. She had to get upstairs before they noticed she was missing. Her mother had specifically told her to stay close, not to wander off like she always did. But Emma had needed answers, and the whispered conversations between the adults had stopped whenever she entered a room. She waited until the men moved toward the far corner, deep in hushed conversation, before slipping out of the storage room. The basement stairs creaked under her weight, each step sounding impossibly loud. Behind her, she could hear the tall man's voice getting agitated. "This whole thing falls apart if that kid starts talking to the wrong people. Marcus had connections we can't afford to have sniffing around." Emma reached the main floor just as her mother appeared in the hallway, supported by Aunt Linda. Her mother's eyes were glassy and unfocused, the prescribed grief medication making her movements slow and deliberate. "There you are," Aunt Linda said, relief evident in her voice. "Your mother was asking for you." Emma studied her mother's face, searching for any sign that she knew the truth, but all she saw was genuine pain, the kind that came from believing your husband was really dead. "Mama," Emma whispered, taking her mother's cold hand, "I need to tell you something." "Not now, sweetheart." Her mother's voice was barely audible. "Later, when we get home." But Emma knew there might not be a later. Not if those men downstairs decided she was too dangerous to leave alone. She thought about the stories her father used to tell her about his motorcycle club, how they were like a family that protected each other. What he'd never mentioned was what happened when that family turned against you. Uncle Sal appeared at the end of the hallway, his usually warm smile replaced by something harder. He nodded to the woman beside him. Someone Emma had never seen before, with cold eyes and a way of standing that reminded her of the men downstairs. "Emma," Uncle Sal called out. "Come here, kiddo. I want you to meet someone." Every instinct Emma had inherited from her father's world screamed at her to run. Instead, she squeezed her mother's hand tighter and forced herself to smile. "In a minute, Uncle Sal. Mama needs me right now." The woman beside Uncle Sal whispered something in his ear, her gaze never leaving Emma's face. Emma realized with growing horror that they weren't just here to pay their respects. They were here to evaluate a threat, and that threat was an 8-year-old girl who had seen too much and knew her father wasn't sleeping in the casket downstairs. The rain hammered against the kitchen window as Sarah paced between the sink and the refrigerator, her phone pressed to her ear. Emma sat at the table, methodically tearing her toast into small pieces, each ripped deliberate and angry. "I don't care what the death certificate says," Sarah hissed into the phone. "My daughter saw something at that crash site, and I need to know what really happened." Detective Morrison's voice crackled through the speaker, tired and dismissive. "Mrs. Chen, I understand you're grieving, but children often create elaborate fantasies to cope with trauma. The body was identified through dental records. Your husband is dead." Emma looked up sharply. "He's not dead," she shouted loud enough for Morrison to hear through the phone. Sarah ended the call with shaking fingers. She'd tried 3 different investigators in the past week, and each one had given her the same patronizing response. The official story was ironclad. Marcus Chen had lost control of his Harley on Highway 9, crashed into the ravine, and died on impact. Case closed. But Emma hadn't stopped insisting otherwise, and the certainty in her daughter's voice was beginning to crack Sarah's resolve to dismiss it as childhood trauma. A knock at the front door made them both freeze. Sarah wasn't expecting anyone, and after the funeral incident, she'd grown paranoid about unexpected visitors. She crept to the window and peered through the blinds. 2 men in expensive suits stood on her porch, their posture too rigid to be social workers or insurance agents. The taller one had a scar running from his left ear to his jaw, and both wore sunglasses despite the overcast sky. "Emma, go to your room," Sarah whispered urgently. "Who is it? Now." Emma scrambled up the stairs, but Sarah knew she'd be listening from the landing. The child had become an expert eavesdropper since Marcus's death, hungry for any scrap of information about her father. Sarah opened the door but kept the chain lock engaged. "Can I help you?" The scarred man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Chen, we're associates of your late husband. We'd like to express our condolences and discuss some business matters Marcus left unfinished. I don't know anything about Marcus's business. Perhaps we could come in. It's rather urgent." "I don't think so." Sarah started to close the door, but the second man's hand shot out, stopping it. "Mrs. Chen, your husband borrowed something from our employer. Something valuable. We need it back." Sarah's mouth went dry. "I don't know what you're talking about." The scarred man leaned closer. A package. Small, probably hidden somewhere Marcus thought was safe. He was supposed to deliver it the night he died, but it never reached its destination. Even if I knew what you meant, which I don't. Everything Marcus owned was destroyed in the crash. We both know that's not true. His voice hardened. Marcus was too smart to carry merchandise on a ride like that. He stashed it somewhere, and we need to find it before certain other parties do. Through the gap in the door, Sarah could see a black sedan idling at the curb. The windows were tinted, but she caught the silhouette of at least one more person inside. "I can't help you," she said firmly. "Think carefully, Mrs. Chen. Your husband's death was unfortunate, but these things happen in our line of work. However, if his family were to become uncooperative, well, he let the threat hang in the air." Sarah's hands trembled as she fumbled with the chain lock. Every instinct screamed at her to slam the door and call 911, but something told her these men would be long gone before police arrived, and they'd be back when she was more vulnerable. "I'll look through his things," she said finally. "But I'm telling you, I don't know about any package. You have 48 hours. The scarred man handed her a business card with nothing but a phone number printed on it. "Call when you find it." They turned and walked back to their car with unhurried confidence. Sarah watched until the sedan disappeared around the corner before deadbolting the door with shaking hands. "Mummy?" Emma's voice came from the stairs. Sarah turned to find her daughter sitting halfway down, her small face pale but determined. "Those were bad men, weren't they?" "I don't know, sweetheart." Emma stood up and walked down the remaining steps. "They want Daddy's secret." Sarah's blood chilled. "What secret, Emma?" "The one he hid before his last ride. The reason he's not really dead." Emma's eyes held a knowledge that seemed impossible for an 8-year-old. "He told me if bad men ever came looking, I should tell you about the place where he keeps his treasures." Sarah knelt down to Emma's eye level. "What place, honey?" "The place only special girls know about. The place where daddies hide things to keep their families safe." The motel room smelled like stale cigarettes and broken dreams. Sarah pressed her back against the thin door, listening for footsteps in the hallway, while Emma sat cross-legged on the faded bedspread, clutching her stuffed rabbit like a lifeline. They'd been hiding for 3 days now, moving from one cheap motel to another, always staying one step ahead of whoever was hunting them. "Mommy, I'm hungry," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the ancient air-conditioning unit. Sarah's heart clenched. The cash from her emergency fund was running low, and she couldn't use her credit cards without leaving a digital trail. She'd learned that much from watching crime shows with Danny during their better years back when she still believed he might change. "I know, sweetheart. We'll get some food soon." Sarah moved away from the door and knelt beside the bed. "But first, I need you to tell me again what you saw that night. The night Daddy didn't come home." Emma's grip tightened on her rabbit. She'd been reluctant to share details, but Sarah was beginning to understand that her daughter had witnessed something far more dangerous than she'd initially realized. The men who'd shown up at their house weren't just bikers paying respects to a fallen brother. They'd been searching for something. "I followed him," Emma said finally. "I wasn't supposed to, but I wanted to see where he went when he took his bike out so late." Sarah's blood ran cold. "You followed Daddy on his motorcycle?" "Emma, how did you—" "I took my bike, the purple one with the basket. He drives really slow when he thinks no one's watching." Emma's voice grew smaller. "I stayed far back like in the movies, but I could see his taillight." The image of her 8-year-old daughter, pedaling through dark streets at midnight, following her father into God knows what kind of danger, made Sarah feel sick. But she forced herself to stay calm, to listen. "Where did he go, baby?" "The old warehouse by the river, the one with all the broken windows." Emma looked up at her mother with eyes that seemed far too old for her face. There were lots of motorcycles there, and cars too, fancy ones. Sarah knew the warehouse Emma meant. It had been abandoned for years, a hulking concrete shell on the outskirts of town where teenagers went to drink and do things their parents hoped they'd never discover. But if Danny had been meeting people there, it wasn't for any legitimate reason. "What happened when you got there?" "I hid behind some trash cans. They were all yelling at each other, Daddy and the other men. One of them had a gun." Emma's voice began to shake. Daddy gave them a bag, a big black bag, but they were still angry. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. Her heart hammered as she glanced at the screen, expecting another threat from Danny's associates. Instead, she found a message from her sister Claire. "Police came by asking about you and Emma. Said you might be in danger. Where are you?" She deleted the message without responding. She couldn't trust anyone now, not even family. The police were either genuinely trying to help, or they were part of whatever web Danny had gotten tangled in before his death. Either way, she couldn't take the chance. "What was in the bag, Emma?" "I don't know. But when Daddy gave it to them, the man with the gun said something about it not being enough. He said Daddy owed them more than just money." Emma's eyes filled with tears. Then there was a big flash of light and everyone started running and shouting. I got scared and rode home as fast as I could. A flash of light. An explosion? Sarah remembered the news report about Danny's accident, how his motorcycle had collided with a semi-truck on Highway 9. But Highway 9 was nowhere near the warehouse by the river. If Emma was telling the truth, then Danny had been at that warehouse the night he died, not riding alone on a deserted highway. Someone knocked on their motel room door. Sarah grabbed Emma and pulled her toward the bathroom, her finger pressed to her lips. The knocking came again, harder this time, followed by a man's voice. "Sarah? Emma? My name is Detective Marcus Webb. I'm here to help." Sarah's mind raced. How had he found them? She'd paid cash for the room, used a fake name. Unless someone had been tracking them all along, waiting for the right moment to close in. "I know you're scared," the voice continued, "but I think you have something that belongs to some very dangerous people. Something Danny was supposed to deliver before he died." Emma looked up at Sarah with terrified eyes, and Sarah realized with growing horror that her daughter hadn't just witnessed her father's last deal. She might have taken something from that warehouse, something worth killing for. The motel room smelled of stale cigarettes and broken dreams. Sarah pulled the curtains tight, checking twice that the chain lock was secure before turning to face her daughter. Emma sat cross-legged on the faded bedspread, still clutching the leather jacket that had started this nightmare. "We need to talk about what you saw that night," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. The walls in places like this were thin, and she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was always listening. Emma's eyes, so much like Marcus's it hurt to look at them, remained fixed on the jacket. "Daddy came home real late. I heard his bike, but it sounded different. Sick." Sarah knelt beside the bed, fighting the urge to grab her daughter's shoulders and shake the truth out of her. Instead, she waited, knowing that pushing Emma had never worked, especially when she was scared. "The man who came in wasn't walking right," Emma continued, her small fingers tracing the worn leather patches. "Daddy always walked loud. Heavy boots, you know, but this person was trying to be quiet, like they were hurt or something." The pieces clicked together in Sarah's mind with terrifying clarity. Marcus had been 6'2" and built like a linebacker. The body at the morgue had been the right height, but something about it had seemed off. She'd attributed her doubts to grief, to the trauma of seeing her husband's remains after such a violent crash. "What else, baby? What else was different?" Emma's voice dropped to barely audible. "He was wearing Daddy's clothes, but they were too big. And when he went to the bathroom, I heard him talking on a phone. He said it's done, and something about a shipment." Sarah's blood ran cold. Marcus had mentioned a shipment the week before he died, something big that the Reapers were moving through town. He'd been agitated about it, more paranoid than usual, checking the locks twice and jumping at every unexpected sound. A knock at the door made them both freeze. 3 soft taps, then 2 more. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she crept to the window and peered through a gap in the curtains. A figure in dark clothing stood outside, face hidden beneath a hood. "Mrs. Kellerman?" The voice was female, young. "I'm Detective Riley Walsh. I think you might be in danger." Sarah looked back at Emma, who had gone pale. They'd been found too quickly. Either this detective was very good at her job, or they were walking into a trap. "How do I know you're really police?" Sarah called through the door. "Because I'm the only one asking the right questions about your husband's accident, the same questions that got me suspended this morning when I started digging too deep." Against every instinct screaming at her to run, Sarah unlocked the door, but kept the chain engaged, opening it just enough to see the woman's face. Detective Walsh was younger than expected, maybe 30, with sharp green eyes and the hollow look of someone who hadn't slept in days. "5 minutes," Sarah said, sliding the chain off. Walsh stepped inside quickly, scanning the room before her gaze settled on Emma. "You're the one who caused a scene at the funeral. Smart kid." "What do you know?" Sarah demanded. "I know that your husband's bike was found in 3 pieces scattered across half a mile of highway, but the crash pattern doesn't match the damage. I know that 2 other Reapers have died in accidents in the past month, and I know that someone very powerful wants this investigation buried." Walsh pulled out her phone, showing them a grainy photograph of a man walking away from a motorcycle. The timestamp showed it was taken 3 hours before Marcus's supposed death. "This was captured by a traffic camera downtown. That's your husband alive and well, after he was supposedly already dead on Highway 9. Emma spoke up suddenly. "The man in our house looked like Daddy from far away, but up close his nose was wrong, and he had a scar Daddy didn't have." "A body double," Walsh said grimly, which means your real husband is either in hiding or they needed him alive for something first. Sarah finished, the horrible implication hitting her like a physical blow. Walsh nodded. The Reapers were running drugs and weapons through the port. Someone got greedy, or someone got scared, and now people are dying. Your husband knew something, had something, or saw something that made him dangerous. A car engine rumbled outside, too loud and too close. Walsh was at the window instantly, cursing under her breath. 3 black SUVs. We need to go. Now. Sarah grabbed Emma's hand, and the bag they'd hastily packed. As they headed for the back window, Emma tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, I know where Daddy really went that night. He told me it was our secret place, where he'd go if the bad men ever came for us." The sound of heavy footsteps approached their door as Sarah boosted Emma through the window into the darkness beyond. The safe house sat like a forgotten tooth in a row of identical ranch homes, its beige siding and brown shutters designed to blend into suburban anonymity. Detective Sarah Chen pulled into the driveway at precisely 9 p.m., her headlights sweeping across drawn curtains that hadn't moved since the family arrived 3 days ago. Inside, Emma sat cross-legged on a threadbare carpet, methodically arranging torn photographs like puzzle pieces. The fragments showed glimpses of her father, a leather jacket here, a motorcycle there, always just enough to tantalize but never enough to complete the picture. "Emma, honey, it's time for bed," Lisa called from the kitchen, her voice carrying the hollow exhaustion that had settled into her bones since the funeral. She'd been washing the same coffee mug for 5 minutes, staring through the window at shadows that might or might not be watchers. "I'm not tired," Emma replied without looking up. Her small fingers traced the edge of a photo fragment showing half of her father's face. "Mama, why did Daddy have 2 different bikes?" The coffee mug slipped from Lisa's hands, shattering against the linoleum. "What did you say?" Detective Chen knocked then, 3 measured raps that made everyone in the house freeze. Marcus appeared from the back bedroom, his face drawn and suspicious. Since arriving at the safe house, he'd positioned himself as the family's reluctant guardian, though his constant pacing suggested he was guarding against something specific. "It's Chen," Sarah announced through the door. Marcus opened it, with the chain still attached, peering through the gap before letting her inside. "Kind of late for a social call, Detective." Sarah's eyes found Emma immediately. The child's uncanny stillness always unnerved her, like Emma was perpetually listening to conversations no one else could hear. "I need to ask Emma about something. We found another bike." The words hit the room like a physical force. Lisa stepped over the broken ceramic, her bare feet careful on the scattered pieces. "Another bike?" "Hidden in a storage unit across town. Registration shows it belonged to Jake Morrison." Sarah pulled out her phone, scrolling to a photograph. "Emma, have you seen this motorcycle before?" Emma glanced at the image and nodded matter-of-factly. "That's Daddy's Sunday bike. He kept it for special trips." "Special trips where?" Sarah's voice remained gentle, but her body language sharpened with attention. "To see the sad lady." Lisa's face went white. "What sad lady?" Emma finally looked up from her photo fragments, her dark eyes holding that unsettling adult awareness, the one who cried a lot. "Daddy said she needed help remembering things, so he brought her pictures." Marcus moved closer to the window, his jaw tight. "Pictures of what?" "The bad men doing bad things." Emma's voice carried no emotion, as if she were reciting a grocery list. "Daddy had lots of pictures hidden in places. He told me they were like insurance, but not the boring kind Mama talks about." Sarah knelt beside Emma, careful not to disturb the arranged photo pieces. "Do you know where these pictures are hidden?" Emma shrugged, returning to her puzzle. "Some places. Daddy showed me the special spots in case something happened to him. He said I was the only one smart enough to remember all of them." The revelation hung in the air like smoke. Sarah felt the investigation shifting beneath her feet, the simple narrative of a biker's death becoming something far more complex and dangerous. "Emma," Lisa's voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell me about the sad lady?" "You never asked." Emma fitted 2 photo fragments together, revealing her father's eyes. "Besides, Daddy said it was our secret. He said secrets keep people safe sometimes." Marcus turned from the window, his expression grim. "We need to move. Tonight." "Why?" Sarah demanded. "Because if Jake was blackmailing people with those photos, and Emma knows where they're hidden, he didn't need to finish the sentence." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. Her face hardened as she read it. The storage unit was broken into 2 hours ago. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were looking for. Emma continued arranging her photo pieces, seemingly oblivious to the tension crackling around her. But Sarah noticed the child's hands trembling slightly as she worked, betraying the fear she refused to voice. "Emma," Sarah said softly, "those pictures your daddy hid, are they all in storage units?" Emma shook her head. "Some are. Some are in other places. Daddy was very careful about spreading them around. He said never put all your eggs in one basket, especially if the basket might catch fire." Outside, a car engine turned over in the darkness. Then another. Marcus grabbed the curtain, peering out at the street where headlights bloomed like predatory eyes. "Too late," he whispered. Emma looked up from her photographs, her young face grave with knowledge no child should possess. "They found us, didn't they?" The safe house smelled like stale coffee and fear. Emma sat curled in the corner of a threadbare couch, her small fingers wrapped around a mug of hot chocolate that had long since gone cold. Detective Sarah Chen watched her from across the cramped living room, noting how the girl's eyes darted to every window, every shadow that moved beyond the heavy curtains. "Tell me about the last time you saw your father," Chen said gently, settling into the chair opposite Emma. The federal agents had stepped outside to take calls, leaving them alone for the first time since the incident at the funeral home. Emma's mother, Linda, stood by the kitchenette, her back rigid with tension. "She's been through enough," Linda said without turning around. "Haven't you people done enough damage? Mrs. Reeves, someone tried to kill your daughter today. We need to understand what Emma knows before—" "Before what?" Linda spun around, her eyes blazing. "Before they succeed. Before my little girl becomes another casualty in whatever sick game my husband was playing." Emma's voice cut through their argument like a blade. "He came to my room 3 nights before the crash." Both women turned to stare at the girl. Emma's gaze was fixed on something far beyond the safe house walls, as if she were watching a movie only she could see. "It was late, really late. I heard his bike in the driveway, but he was trying to be quiet about it." Emma's voice was steady, matter-of-fact in the way only children could manage when recounting trauma. He still had his leather jacket on when he came upstairs. It was wet from the rain. Chen pulled out her notebook, but kept her movements slow and non-threatening. "What did he say to you, Emma?" "He sat on my bed and told me he loved me. He said he was going on a long trip and that some bad people might try to hurt our family while he was gone." Finally looked up at Chen, her young face eerily composed. "He gave me something, said if anything happened to him, I should give it to someone I trusted." Linda dropped her coffee mug. It shattered on the linoleum floor, sending ceramic shards skittering across the room. "Emma, you never told me." "He made me promise not to tell anyone, unless he died for real." Emma's emphasis on the last 2 words sent a chill down Chen's spine. "But he's not dead, so I kept the promise." Chen leaned forward. "What did he give you, sweetheart?" Emma slipped her hand into the pocket of her funeral dress and pulled out a small object wrapped in black electrical tape. She held it protectively against her chest. "He said it was like insurance, that it would keep us safe if the bad people came." The front door opened with a soft click, and Agent Morrison stepped back inside, his phone still pressed to his ear. He caught sight of the object in Emma's hands and ended his call abruptly. "What's that?" His voice was sharper than necessary, and Emma instinctively shrank back into the couch cushions. "Evidence," Chen said firmly, positioning herself between Morrison and the girl. "Emma was just telling us about her father's last visit." Morrison's partner, Agent Walsh, appeared in the doorway behind him. The 2 federal agents exchanged a look that made Chen's instincts prickle with warning. "We need to see what she's holding," Morrison said, taking a step closer. "For her own protection." "Back off," Chen snapped, her hand moving instinctively toward her service weapon. "She's a traumatized 8-year-old, not a suspect." Linda moved closer to her daughter, maternal instincts overriding everything else. "What's going on? Why are you all acting like—" The lights went out. Emergency lighting flickered on a moment later, casting eerie shadows across the room. Through the heavy curtains, Chen could see the neighboring houses were still lit up. Someone had cut their power specifically. "Get down!" Morrison barked, drawing his weapon. "Walsh, check the perimeter." But Walsh was already moving toward Emma, his intentions clear. Chen drew her gun, pointing it directly at the federal agent. "I said back off." "Detective Chen, you're interfering with a federal investigation," Walsh said, but he stopped moving toward the girl. "Funny," Chen replied, her voice deadly calm. "Because right now, it looks like I'm protecting a witness from federal agents who seem more interested in what she's holding than in keeping her safe." Emma's whisper cut through the tension. "Mama, these are the bad people Daddy warned me about." Outside, the sound of motorcycle engines rumbled to life in the distance. Multiple bikes moving fast, heading their way. Linda grabbed her daughter's hand. "We have to go. Now." Chen kept her weapon trained on the federal agents as she backed toward the rear exit. Whatever was on that small device Emma clutched so tightly, people were willing to kill for it. And the sound of approaching engines suggested they were running out of time to figure out why. The warehouse reeked of motor oil and rust, its cavernous interior lit by scattered fluorescent tubes that cast harsh shadows between towers of motorcycle parts. Emma pressed herself against the cold concrete wall, her small hand gripping Sarah's with white-knuckled intensity. They'd been hiding behind a stack of chrome exhaust pipes for what felt like hours, waiting for Detective Morrison's signal. "Where is she?" The voice that cut through the mechanical silence made Emma's blood freeze. She recognized it instantly, the same gravelly tone that had whispered threats through her bedroom window, the same voice that belonged to the man with the spider tattoo who'd been watching their house. Sarah squeezed Emma's hand, a silent reminder to stay perfectly still. Through a gap in the machinery, they could see 3 figures moving in the center of the warehouse. Spider Tattoo stood with his back to them, his leather vest adorned with patches that caught the fluorescent light. Beside him, a woman with silver hair pulled into a severe bun examined something on a nearby workbench. The third figure remained in shadow, but Emma could make out the outline of someone much larger than the others. "The kid saw too much," Spider Tattoo continued, his boots echoing against the concrete as he paced. "Marcus should have kept his mouth shut about the Chicago job. Now we've got cops sniffing around, and that detective won't stop asking questions about the crash." The silver-haired woman looked up from the workbench, her voice sharp as a blade. "Marcus always was careless. Good thing the accident took care of him before he could do more damage." Emma's stomach lurched. Accident. They were talking about Daddy's crash like they'd planned it. Her free hand instinctively moved to the small recording device Detective Morrison had given her, hidden in her jacket pocket. She had to capture this. "Problem is, his daughter knows something," the woman continued. "Kids that age, they remember everything. Details adults miss." The shadow figure finally stepped into the light, revealing a mountain of a man with scars crisscrossing his shaved head. His voice rumbled like distant thunder. "So we make sure she doesn't remember anymore." Emma's breath caught in her throat. Sarah's grip tightened protectively, but Emma forced herself to focus on the recording device. She carefully pressed the activation button, praying the tiny click wouldn't echo in the vast space. "The shipment from Chicago was our biggest score yet," Spider Tattoo said, pulling out a cigarette. "Enough weapons to supply every crew from here to the Gulf. Marcus threatened to expose the whole operation if we didn't cut him a bigger piece. So you sabotaged his bike," the silver-haired woman stated matter-of-factly. The scarred giant nodded. "Brake lines made it look like mechanical failure. Would have been perfect if the kid hadn't started screaming about him not being dead." Emma's world tilted. She'd been right all along. Daddy wasn't dead, at least not when she'd seen him at the funeral home. But hearing the confirmation that these people had killed him made her chest tight with rage and terror. "Speaking of the kid," Spider Tattoo said, flicking ash onto the concrete, "where exactly are we supposed to find her?" "The cops moved the family after our warning visits. "I've got contacts in the department," the woman replied, her smile visible even from Emma's hiding spot. "Detective Morrison thinks he's so clever, but he's been feeding information to the wrong people. We'll have their location by morning." Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. Detective Morrison had promised they were safe, but these people had connections everywhere. She needed to get this recording to someone they could trust. But who? The scarred man pulled out a smartphone and began scrolling through messages. "Boss wants this wrapped up clean. No more warnings, no more games. The kid disappears, and we blame it on trauma from losing her father. Family moves away to start fresh. Case goes cold." "What about the mother and aunt?" Spider Tattoo asked. "Collateral damage if necessary," the woman said with a shrug. "But the priority is silencing the girl. She's the only one who can connect Marcus to the Chicago shipment." A metal pipe suddenly clanged somewhere behind them, and all three criminals spun toward the sound. Emma's pulse spiked as she realized Detective Morrison was making his move, but it was too early. She hadn't gotten everything on the recording yet. "Time to go," Sarah whispered urgently, tugging Emma toward a side exit they'd identified earlier. But Emma pulled back, desperate to capture more evidence. The recording device was still running, and these people had just confessed to murdering her father. She needed names, locations, details about the Chicago shipment that could bring down the entire operation. "Someone's here," the scarred man growled, reaching inside his jacket. Spider Tattoo dropped his cigarette and crushed it under his heel. "Check the perimeter. If it's cops, we go to ground. If it's the kid—" He left the threat hanging in the stale air. Emma realized with growing horror that their escape route was about to be cut off. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town looked like every other derelict building in the industrial district, but Emma's small hand trembled as she pointed toward its rusted doors. Sarah pulled the rental car behind a stack of shipping containers, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You're sure this is where he said to meet?" Marcus whispered from the passenger seat, his eyes scanning the empty lot for any sign of movement. Emma nodded, clutching the burner phone her father had given her months ago. The same phone that had buzzed 3 times yesterday with a message that made Sarah's blood run cold. "Little bird needs to fly home. Nest compromised. Come alone." But Sarah hadn't come alone. After everything that had happened, after Detective Chen's warning about federal agents closing in and Razor's crew sniffing around their safe house, she couldn't risk Emma's safety on blind trust, even if that trust was in her supposedly dead husband. The warehouse door creaked open before they reached it, and a figure emerged from the shadows. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Jake stood there, alive but transformed. His beard was longer, streaked with grey she'd never seen before. His eyes held a wariness that cut through her like a blade. "I told you to come alone," he said, his voice rougher than she remembered. "You told us you were dead," Sarah shot back, anger and relief warring in her chest. "I think we're past following your instructions." Emma broke free from Sarah's grip and ran toward her father. Jake's carefully controlled expression cracked as he caught his daughter, lifting her against his chest like she weighed nothing. "Dad, I knew you weren't really dead," Emma whispered against his neck. "I could feel it. I know, baby bird. You were always too smart for your own good." Jake's eyes met Sarah's over Emma's head, and she saw something that made her stomach clench with dread. "We don't have much time. They know where you've been staying." Marcus stepped forward, his hand resting on the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. "Who's they? The Reapers? The Feds? Both?" Jake set Emma down but kept one hand on her shoulder. "The people I've been hiding from. The ones who wanted me dead badly enough that I had to let everyone believe they'd succeeded." Sarah felt the last pieces of her patience crumble. "Stop talking in riddles, Jake. Our daughter has been through hell. I've been through hell. You owe us the truth." The sound of approaching vehicles cut through the night air, and Jake's face went pale. "Damn it. They found us faster than I thought." He grabbed a duffel bag from inside the warehouse and slung it over his shoulder. "There's a drainage tunnel behind the building. It leads to the old subway system." "Jake, what did you do?" Sarah demanded as they hurried toward the back of the warehouse. "What were you carrying that night? that made you disappear?" Emma stumbled, and Jake scooped her up again, his movements quick and efficient. "I wasn't carrying anything out," he said, his voice barely audible over the sound of car doors slamming in the distance. "I was carrying someone in." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd assumed Jake had been smuggling drugs or weapons, something that would explain the Reaper's violent reaction to his supposed death. But a person changed everything. "Who?" Marcus asked, checking the rear exit before motioning them through. "A federal prosecutor's daughter, 16 years old. The Colombians had taken her to leverage a case her father was building against their money laundering operation." Jake's words came in short bursts as they navigated the narrow space behind the building. "I was supposed to deliver her to a safe house, but someone leaked the route." Sarah's mind raced as they reached the drainage tunnel. "So you faked your death to protect her?" "I faked my death to protect everyone." Jake lifted the heavy grate covering the tunnel entrance. The leak came from inside the prosecutor's office. If they thought I was dead, they'd stop hunting me long enough for me to get the girl somewhere safe. Shouts echoed from the front of the warehouse, followed by the distinctive sound of motorcycle engines. The Reapers had arrived, and by the urgency in the voices, they weren't alone. "What about now?" Emma asked as they descended into the tunnel. "Is the girl safe now?" Jake's silence stretched too long, and Sarah knew the answer before he spoke. She was, until 3 days ago. They found the safe house. His voice broke slightly. "She's missing again, and this time they know I'm alive." The tunnel stretched ahead of them, dark and uncertain. Above, flashlight beams cut through the warehouse windows, and Sarah realized they weren't just running from Jake's past anymore. They were running toward a future where Emma's innocent observation at a funeral had pulled them into the center of something far more dangerous than a biker gang's revenge. They were now witnesses to a federal case, and everyone involved had already proven they were willing to kill to keep their secrets buried. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town felt like stepping into a tomb. Emma clutched her mother's hand as they followed Detective Rodriguez through the maze of rusted machinery and cobweb-draped beams. The air tasted of metal and decay, and every shadow seemed to hide watching eyes. "This is where your father's bike was found," Rodriguez said, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. The beams settled on a dark stain near the far wall, but something never sat right about the scene. Emma's breath caught. She could almost see him there, her father, tall and defiant even in danger. The memory from that terrible night flickered again, clearer now. She'd hidden in the closet when the shouting started, peeking through the slats as strange men filled their living room. "The blood spatter was wrong," Rodriguez continued, kneeling beside the stain. "Too neat, too controlled, like someone wanted us to find it exactly this way." Sarah pulled Emma closer, her wedding ring catching the flashlight's glow. "You think Jake staged this?" "I think your husband was smarter than anyone gave him credit for." Rodriguez stood, brushing dust from his knees. "The question is why he needed to disappear, and who he was running from." A metallic clang echoed from somewhere deeper in the warehouse. Rodriguez's hand moved instinctively to his weapon. "Stay behind me," he whispered. They crept forward, footsteps muffled by years of accumulated debris. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs as they rounded a corner and found themselves face to face with a figure emerging from behind an overturned shipping container. It wasn't her father. The man was older, grey-bearded, wearing the same leather vest that had terrified Emma that night. The serpent's patch gleamed dully on his chest, but his eyes held no malice, only a bone-deep weariness that reminded Emma of her grandmother in her final days. "Easy there, detective," the man said, hands raised but relaxed. "Name's Hank Morrison. I was Jake's sponsor." Rodriguez kept his weapon drawn but didn't advance. "Sponsor for what?" "Narcotics Anonymous. Jake's been clean for 3 years. Hank's weathered face creased into something resembling a smile. "Bet that's not in his file." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Emma felt her mother's grip tighten, nails digging into her palm. 3 years. That meant he'd gotten clean right after Emma's birth, after he'd held her tiny body in his massive hands and promised to be better. "That's impossible," Sarah breathed. The club, his lifestyle, was all a cover. Hank finished. Jake was working with the DEA, had been since he got out of county lockup 4 years ago. They offered him a deal, help them bring down the Serpent's distribution network from the inside, or go away for 25 to life. The warehouse seemed to spin around Emma. Her father, the man she'd defended at his own funeral, hadn't been the monster everyone thought. He'd been trying to fix things, trying to be the father she'd always believed he could be. The night he disappeared, Rodriguez pressed, "What happened?" Hank's expression darkened. Someone blew his cover. The Serpents found out Jake was feeding information to the feds. Club president Tommy Vance put a kill order out. Jake had maybe 6 hours before they'd come for him and his family. Emma's memory crystallized with terrible clarity. The shouting hadn't been her father dealing drugs or planning crimes. It had been him arguing with Sarah, begging her to pack up and run. But her mother had refused to listen, refused to believe that their quiet suburban life was about to explode. "So he staged his death," Sarah said slowly, pieces clicking into place. "Made it look like the Serpents had already killed him, so they'd stop hunting." "Bought you time," Hank confirmed. "Time for the DEA to round up the major players. Time for you and Emma to disappear if necessary." His eyes found Emma's. "Your daddy loves you more than his own life, little girl. Don't ever forget that." Rodriguez lowered his weapon but remained alert. "Where is he now?" "That's the million-dollar question." Hank pulled a crumpled envelope from his jacket. "This came through our usual channels 3 days ago. Jake's handwriting." Emma watched her mother's hands shake as she opened the envelope. Inside was a single photograph. Her father, very much alive, standing beside a motorcycle on what looked like a desert highway. On the back, in his familiar scrawl, "Tell Emma her daddy's coming home soon. Tell her the bad men can't hurt us anymore." The sound of engines roared to life outside the warehouse. Multiple bikes, growing closer. Rodriguez cursed under his breath as Hank went rigid with fear. "That's not possible," Hank whispered. "Tommy Vance is in federal custody. The Serpents are finished. Apparently not all of them," Rodriguez said grimly, checking his radio for backup. "And they just found us." The abandoned warehouse smelled of rust and decades-old motor oil. Detective Sarah Chen crouched behind a stack of corroded drums, her radio crackling softly with updates from the tactical team positioned around the perimeter. Through a grimy window, she could see Tommy Iron Horse Martinez pacing near a motorcycle that looked suspiciously like the one reported stolen from Jake Morrison's garage 3 days ago. "Visual confirmation on the bike," she whispered into her radio. "Moving to phase 2. Across the warehouse floor, Martinez stopped pacing and pulled out his phone. Even from this distance, Chen could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he kept glancing toward the loading dock. Whatever was supposed to happen here, he was nervous about it. 2 miles away, Emma Morrison sat in the back seat of an unmarked police car, her small hands pressed against the window, as she watched her Uncle Danny emerge from the courthouse. The plea hearing had taken less than 20 minutes. Danny's lawyer had negotiated a deal that would keep him out of prison in exchange for his testimony about the Devil's Backbone's money laundering operation. "He looks different," Emma said to Officer Rodriguez, who had been assigned to watch her during the hearing. Rodriguez followed her gaze. Danny Morrison did look different. The cocky swagger was gone, replaced by the careful movements of a man who knew he was walking a tightrope between survival and destruction. His eyes swept the courthouse steps, checking faces, calculating threats. "People change when they're scared," Rodriguez said gently. Emma nodded, but something else was bothering her. Something about the way Danny kept checking his watch, as if he was waiting for something specific to happen. She remembered her father doing the same thing on the night he supposedly died. That constant glancing at the time, the nervous energy that made him pace around their kitchen like a caged animal. "Officer Rodriguez," she said slowly, "what time is Uncle Danny supposed to be done with his police interview?" Rodriguez checked her notes. 3:30. Why? Emma's stomach dropped. It was already 3:45, and Danny was walking away from the courthouse instead of going back inside. She watched him pull out his phone and make a call, his free hand gesturing urgently as he spoke. "Something's wrong," she whispered. Back at the warehouse, Chen's radio erupted with chatter. Danny Morrison had failed to report for his scheduled debriefing, and his ankle monitor showed him moving rapidly toward the industrial district, the same industrial district where they were conducting their surveillance operation. "All units, be advised," came the voice of her lieutenant. "Subject Daniel Morrison is potentially en route to your location. Unknown if he's been compromised or if this is voluntary." Chen felt ice in her veins. If Danny had been turned, or if he was planning to warn Martinez about the operation, months of careful investigation would evaporate in minutes. Worse, if the Devil's Backbone discovered that Danny had been cooperating with law enforcement, his life expectancy would be measured in hours, not days. Through the grimy window, she watched Martinez answer his phone. Even without hearing the conversation, she could read his body language, the sudden stillness, followed by rapid, angry gestures. He was receiving bad news. Martinez ended the call and immediately began wheeling the stolen motorcycle toward a side exit. Whatever Danny had told him, it was enough to make him abandon whatever plan had brought him to the warehouse. Chen made a split-second decision. They couldn't let Martinez disappear with the bike. It was their only physical evidence linking him to Jake Morrison's fake death. She signaled her team and stepped out from behind the drums. "Police! Stop where you are!" Martinez looked up, his hand freezing on the motorcycle's handlebars. For a moment, the warehouse was silent except for the distant rumble of traffic. Then Martinez smiled, a cold, calculating expression that made Chen's hand drift toward her weapon. "Detective Chen," he said, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "Right on time." The words hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't a surprise. Martinez had been expecting her. "You set this up," she said, pieces falling into place with horrible clarity. "The stolen bike, the warehouse, all of it. This is a trap." Martinez's smile widened. "Emma Morrison isn't the only one who knows secrets about her daddy's last ride. The difference is, my secrets are about to make your investigation disappear permanently." He pulled something from his jacket, not a weapon, but a small recording device. "Jake Morrison has been very chatty lately. Turns out, when a man's supposed to be dead, he gets careless about who might be listening to his phone calls." Chen's mind raced. If Jake was alive and Martinez had recordings of him, it meant the entire investigation was compromised. Every move they'd made, every witness they'd interviewed, every piece of evidence they'd gathered. It could all be worthless. "Where is he?" she demanded. Martinez pocketed the recorder and swung his leg over the motorcycle. "Ask your friend Danny if you can find him before we do." The engine roared to life, and Detective Chen realized that everything she thought she knew about Jake Morrison's death was about to change again. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town felt like stepping into a tomb. Emma clutched her mother's hand as they followed Detective Morrison through the maze of rusted machinery and scattered debris, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Uncle Jake walked beside them, his eyes constantly scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. "This is where the GPS tracker went dark," Morrison said, stopping beside a oil-stained concrete pillar. "Your father's bike was found 3 miles from here, but this is his last confirmed location." Emma pulled away from her mother and walked toward a stack of wooden crates in the corner. Something about this place felt familiar, like a half-remembered dream that left traces of unease. She could almost hear the rumble of motorcycle engines, the sharp voices of angry men. "Emma?" "Stay close," Sarah called, but Emma was already moving toward the crates, drawn by an instinct she couldn't explain. Behind the largest crate, partially hidden by a tattered tarp, was a motorcycle. Not her father's Harley, but a sleek black bike that seemed to absorb the dim light filtering through the broken windows. Emma approached it slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Mom," she whispered, then louder, "Mom, come here." The adults hurried over, Morrison already pulling out his phone to call for backup, but Emma was focused on something else entirely. Tucked beneath the bike seat was a small leather journal, its pages yellowed with age and damp. Jake reached for it, but Emma was quicker. She flipped it open, her reading skills still developing but good enough to make out the careful handwriting inside. Most of it was beyond her comprehension. Numbers, dates, names she didn't recognize. But on the last page with writing, She found something that made her blood run cold. Emma's birthday party. Tell her I love her. If something happens, she knows where to find the truth. Morrison crouched beside her. What does it say, Emma? She showed him the page, her finger trembling as she pointed to her father's familiar handwriting. He knew something bad was going to happen. He wrote this before he died. Sarah knelt on Emma's other side, reading over her daughter's shoulder. What truth is he talking about, sweetheart? What does that mean? Emma closed her eyes, trying to remember. The night of her birthday party seemed so long ago now, but she could still picture her father pulling her aside while the other kids played in the backyard. He'd been different that day, nervous, distracted. She'd thought it was just because he'd forgotten to buy her present until the last minute. He gave me something, she said slowly, at my party. He said it was special, that I should keep it somewhere safe and never tell anyone about it unless something happened to him. Jake straightened up, his expression tense. Emma, where is this thing he gave you? At home, in my room. She looked up at the adults surrounding her, suddenly afraid of the intensity in their faces. I hid it like he told me to. Morrison was already moving toward the exit. We need to get to your house. Now. They drove in tense silence, Morrison's police radio crackling with updates about the warehouse investigation. Emma sat in the back seat between her mother and uncle, the leather journal clutched in her small hands. She kept thinking about that night, about the way her father had looked when he handed her the small wrapped package. Promise me something, princess, he'd said, his voice unusually serious. If anything ever happens to me, if people start asking questions about things they shouldn't know about, you take this to someone you trust. But only then, not before. At the time, she'd nodded solemnly, caught up in what felt like a grown-up game of secrets. Now she understood that it hadn't been a game at all. Their house looked different as they pulled into the driveway, smaller somehow, more vulnerable. Morrison had called for additional units to secure the perimeter, and Emma could see police cars positioned at both ends of the street. The sight should have made her feel safer, but instead it emphasized just how much danger they were all in. Inside, Emma led them straight to her bedroom. She moved her desk chair to the closet and climbed up to reach the highest shelf, her fingers searching behind a stack of old board games until they found the small box wrapped in faded birthday paper. She handed it down to her mother, and they all gathered around as Sarah carefully peeled away the wrapping. Inside was a USB drive and a folded piece of paper with Emma's name written on the outside. Morrison reached for the drive, but Sarah held up her hand. The note first. She unfolded the paper and read aloud, Emma, if you're reading this, then the people I was trying to protect you from have found me. The information on this drive will keep you safe, but it will also change everything. I'm sorry I couldn't be the father you deserved, but I hope someday you'll understand that everything I did was for you. The abandoned warehouse smelled of rust and motor oil, its broken windows casting fractured shadows across the concrete floor. Emma clutched her mother's hand as they followed Marcus deeper into the cavernous space, their footsteps echoing despite their attempts at silence. Sarah's grip was white-knuckled, her eyes darting between the maze of shipping containers and rusted machinery. He's here, Marcus whispered, stopping beside a makeshift partition built from stacked crates. But Sarah, you need to prepare yourself. The explosion, it left marks. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. For 2 weeks, everyone had told her that her father was dead, buried in the ground while she screamed the truth that no one would believe. Now, standing just feet away from proof that she'd been right all along, fear and vindication warred in her chest. A figure emerged from behind the partition, moving slowly, favoring his left side. Emma's breath caught. It was her father, but not as she remembered him. Angry red scars traced across the left side of his face and disappeared beneath his collar. His once thick hair was patchy, and when he looked at them, his left eye was milky white. "Daddy?" Emma's voice cracked. Jake Russo's good eye found his daughter, and his scarred face crumpled. He dropped to one knee, wincing, and opened his arms. Emma broke free from her mother's grip and ran to him, burying her face against his leather jacket that still smelled like home beneath the antiseptic. "My brave girl," he whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so damn sorry." Sarah hadn't moved. She stood frozen, her face cycling through relief, fury, and something else Emma couldn't name. When Jake looked up at his wife over their daughter's head, the silence stretched taut as a wire. 3 weeks, Sarah said finally, her voice deadly quiet. 3 weeks I thought you were dead. 3 weeks Emma cried herself to sleep because everyone said she was wrong. 3 weeks of Detective Morrison breathing down my neck, asking questions about you and the serpents. Jake gently disentangled himself from Emma and stood, his movements careful and pained. I had to disappear completely. If anyone suspected I'd survived. You let your own daughter think you were dead. Sarah's voice cracked like a whip through the warehouse. Do you have any idea what that did to her? What it did to me? Emma stepped back, the familiar sick feeling blooming in her stomach as her parents' voices rose. Even here, even with the miracle of her father being alive, everything was falling apart. The serpents put a bomb in my bike, Jake said, his voice rough. Victor found out I was the informant. If they knew I survived, they'd never stop hunting us. Any of us. So instead you decided to play dead and let us suffer? Sarah wiped angry tears from her cheeks. Let Emma suffer? Marcus cleared his throat awkwardly. We should move this along. Victor's men have been sniffing around. If they track Emma here... The mention of Victor Kozlov sent ice through Emma's veins. She remembered the cold-eyed man from the motorcycle dealership, the way he'd looked at her like she was something to be stepped on. Jake's expression hardened. Morrison's using Emma as bait, isn't he? That's why he brought you to the dealership. Sarah nodded miserably. He thinks Victor will make a move to silence her. He has no idea she's actually right about you being alive. This changes everything, Marcus said. If Morrison's investigation exposes Jake before we can get you all relocated, we're not running. Jake's voice carried the steel that Emma remembered from when he'd faced down bullies at her school. I'm tired of running, tired of hiding. Victor wants me dead, let him come for me. But not my family. Emma found her voice. What about the USB drive? Both her parents stared at her. Marcus raised an eyebrow. What USB drive, sweetheart? Sarah asked. Emma reached into her backpack and pulled out the small device she'd found in her father's jacket pocket. That night he'd come home bloody and scared. You hid this in your jacket. The night you came home hurt. I found it when I was trying to keep a piece of you. Jake's good eye widened. He took the drive with shaking hands. Jesus, Emma, I thought I'd lost this in the explosion. This has everything on it. Every deal, every name, every crime the serpents have committed for the past 2 years, including Victor's trafficking operation. Marcus breathed. That's enough to put him away forever. Sarah looked between them. So what now? We give it to Morrison? Jake shook his head slowly. No, we end this ourselves. Tonight. Victor thinks he won, thinks he killed me and scared my family into silence. Time to show him how wrong he is. Emma felt something shift in the warehouse's stale air, like the moment before lightning strikes. Her father was alive, and finally they were going to fight back. The warehouse stretched endlessly in the dim light, shadows dancing between towering stacks of shipping containers. Emma pressed herself against the cold metal wall, her heart hammering so loud she was certain everyone could hear it. Detective Morrison crouched beside her, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. "Stay close," he whispered, checking his weapon one more time. "When I give the signal, you run straight to that exit behind the blue container. Don't look back." Emma nodded, though every fiber in her body screamed against leaving him behind. They'd come too far together, uncovered too much truth, to split up now. But she understood the weight of what they carried, the evidence that would bring down Victor Kozlov's entire operation and prove her father had died trying to expose it all. Footsteps echoed from the far end of the warehouse, multiple sets, moving with purpose. Morrison tensed beside her, peering around the corner of their hiding spot. The beam of a flashlight swept across the concrete floor, getting closer. "I know you're in here, Detective." Victor's voice carried across the cavernous space, smooth and controlled despite the circumstances. The girl, too. This doesn't have to end badly for anyone. Morrison's jaw tightened. Emma had seen that look before, the same expression he'd worn when he first started believing her story about her father. determination mixed with barely contained fury. "Your father was a good man, Emma," Morrison breathed against her ear. "He would have been proud of you." The words sent a chill down her spine. Morrison was talking like this was goodbye. More footsteps, closer now. Emma counted at least 4 different sets. They were being surrounded, the net drawing tighter with each passing second. She thought about the USB drive in Morrison's jacket pocket, the one containing her father's final recording, the financial records, everything that would prove the corruption reached all the way to the top of the police department. A radio crackled somewhere in the darkness. "South entrance is clear. Moving to Sector 3. Emma's blood ran cold. She recognized that voice, Officer Daniels, the one who'd been so kind to her mother after the funeral, the one who'd offered to help with anything they needed. Another corrupt cop on Victor's payroll. Morrison's grip on her shoulder tightened. He'd heard it too. "The recording your father made," Victor called out again, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "I'll admit, it was thorough, more than we anticipated. But recordings can disappear. Evidence gets lost. It happens all the time." Emma watched Morrison's face in the pale light filtering through the grimy windows above. Something shifted in his expression. Not defeat, but calculation. He was planning something. "However," Victor continued, "loose ends bother me. They have a way of becoming problems later." A new sound made Emma's breath catch, the distant wail of sirens, multiple units getting closer. Morrison had managed to call for backup before they'd lost cell service in the warehouse, but would help arrive in time? Victor must have heard them too, because his tone changed, becoming more urgent. "Find them. Now." Morrison turned to Emma, his eyes intense in the dim light. "Remember what I taught you about reading people?" She nodded, thinking back to their conversations during the investigation. How he'd shown her the tells that gave away when someone was lying, the body language that revealed hidden motives. "Your father saw something in people that others missed. He knew who to trust." Morrison reached into his jacket and pulled out the USB drive. "I need you to make that choice now." Before Emma could ask what he meant, Morrison stood up, his weapon drawn. "Victor, let's talk!" "Detective Morrison." Victor's voice carried amusement now. "I was hoping we could resolve this like civilized people." Morrison stepped out from behind their cover, hands raised with his gun pointed skyward in a gesture of temporary truce. "The girl doesn't know anything. This is between us." Emma wanted to scream that it wasn't true, that she knew everything. But Morrison had drilled into her the importance of staying silent when the plan was in motion. Even if she didn't understand the plan yet. "Bring her out," Victor called back, "and we'll discuss terms." The sirens were getting closer. Emma could see flashing red and blue lights beginning to reflect off the windows high above. But would the responding officers be the good ones, or more of Victor's people? Morrison caught her eye one last time and mouthed a single word: "Run." Then he stepped fully into the open space between the containers, his gun now pointed directly ahead. "Emma's not part of this negotiation, Victor. You want the evidence? Come and take it." The warehouse erupted into chaos as gunfire shattered the silence, and Emma found herself sprinting through the shadows, clutching the real USB drive Morrison had secretly pressed into her hand, understanding finally that everything depended on her reaching those sirens outside. The warehouse smelled of rust and motor oil, shadows dancing across concrete walls as headlights swept through broken windows. Emma pressed herself against Detective Morrison's side, her small hand clutching the evidence bag containing the GPS tracker that had led them here. This was supposed to be the end game, the place where her father would finally surface and end the charade that had torn their family apart. But the silence felt wrong. Morrison's radio crackled softly as backup units confirmed their positions around the perimeter. They'd followed every lead, traced every connection through the Serpent's network, and the GPS coordinates had brought them to this abandoned auto shop on the outskirts of town. According to their intelligence, Marcus Kane, Emma's supposedly dead father, had been using this location as his base of operations while orchestrating his elaborate disappearance. Emma's breath came in short puffs in the cold night air. 3 weeks had passed since she'd screamed the truth at his funeral. 3 weeks of running and hiding while the serpents hunted them, and the police treated her family like criminals. Her mother Sarah had aged years in those weeks, the stress carving new lines around her eyes. But Emma had never wavered in her certainty. She'd seen her father after the crash, alive and walking away. "Stay close to me," Morrison whispered, his weapon drawn as they approached the main entrance. The detective had become their unlikely protector, the only cop who'd believed Emma's story when the evidence started adding up. The inconsistencies in the crash scene, the missing motorcycle parts, the witnesses who'd suddenly changed their stories, it all pointed to an elaborate staging. The door stood slightly ajar, a triangle of deeper darkness beyond. Morrison signaled to his team, then pushed it open with his foot. The hinges groaned in protest, the sound echoing through the cavernous space. Emergency lighting cast everything in harsh shadows, revealing workbenches covered with motorcycle parts and tools. Emma's eyes adjusted quickly, scanning for any sign of movement. Her heart hammered against her ribs as they moved deeper into the warehouse, past rows of stripped bikes and oil-stained equipment. This place felt haunted, as if secrets had soaked into the very walls. "There," Morrison said quietly, pointing toward a makeshift office area in the far corner. A single light burned behind frosted glass, and Emma could make out the silhouette of someone sitting at a desk. They approached carefully, Morrison's team flanking from both sides. Emma's mouth went dry as they drew closer. After everything they'd been through, all the danger and fear and desperate searching, they were finally going to get answers. She was going to see her father again and demand to know why he'd put their family through this nightmare. But when Morrison kicked open the office door, the figure behind the desk didn't move, couldn't move. Emma's scream caught in her throat. The man slumped over the desk wasn't her father. It was Tommy Raines, one of the Serpent's lieutenants, and he'd been dead for hours. Blood had pooled beneath his head, and his eyes stared sightlessly at the scattered papers that covered the desk surface. "Jesus," Morrison breathed, immediately pulling Emma back from the doorway. But she'd already seen enough. Papers with her father's handwriting, photographs of their house, plans that made her stomach turn to ice. A slow clap echoed through the warehouse, coming from somewhere in the shadows behind them. Emma spun around, her heart stopping as a familiar figure emerged from behind a stack of motorcycle frames. Marcus Kane looked exactly as she remembered, but somehow completely different. The father who'd read her bedtime stories and taught her to ride a bicycle was gone, replaced by someone whose eyes held a coldness that made her step backward. He wore the same leather jacket from the night of the crash, the one she'd watched him walk away in, but now it seemed like a costume he'd never really taken off. "Hello, Princess," he said, and his voice carried none of the warmth she remembered. "I was wondering when you'd finally track me down." Morrison raised his weapon, but Marcus held up a hand, showing he was unarmed. "No need for that, Detective. I've been waiting for this conversation." His gaze shifted to Emma, and she saw something flicker across his features. Regret, maybe, or the ghost of genuine affection, though I wish it could have happened differently. Emma found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "Why did you fake it? Why did you make us think you were dead?" Marcus's smile held no humor. "Because, sweetheart, I needed everyone to believe that Marcus Kane was gone, including you, especially you." He gestured toward the dead man in the office. But plans change when little girls are too smart for their own good. The warehouse suddenly felt like a trap, and Emma realized with growing horror that they hadn't found her father at all. He'd been waiting for them to find him. The warehouse smelled of rust and motor oil, a fitting place for Tommy Reeves to finally surface. Emma pressed herself against Detective Martinez's side as they watched from behind a stack of shipping containers, the weight of the wire taped to her chest feeling heavier with each breath. 3 months of hiding, 3 months of running, and it all came down to this moment. Martinez squeezed her shoulder. "You're being very brave, Emma. Just remember what we practiced." The plan was simple. In theory, Emma would approach her father while the FBI surrounded the building. Her voice would draw out the confession they needed about the drug money, the fake death, the whole network that had cost 3 people their lives. But standing here now, Watching Tommy laugh with men whose faces she'd seen on wanted posters, Simple felt like a cruel joke. "Daddy!" she called out, stepping into the light. The laughter died instantly. Tommy spun around, his face cycling through shock, joy, and terror in the span of seconds. Behind him, the other bikers reached for weapons before he waved them off. "Emma? Jesus Christ, how did you find me?" He dropped to one knee as she ran to him, his arms encircling her in a hug that felt like coming home and stepping off a cliff simultaneously. "I never stopped looking," she said into his leather jacket, the words both truth and performance. "Everyone said you were dead, but I knew better. I knew you wouldn't leave me." Tommy pulled back, his eyes scanning the shadows beyond the warehouse lights. "Baby girl, you shouldn't be here. This place, these people, I don't care about them." Emma's voice carried the practiced petulance of an 8-year-old, even as her heart hammered against the recording device. "I found your journal, Daddy, the one you hid under the floorboard. I know about the money you took from those bad men." The color drained from Tommy's face. Around them, the other bikers had gone silent, their attention suddenly sharp and dangerous. Emma felt the shift like a change in barometric pressure before a storm. "What money, sweetheart? I don't know what you're talking about." But his voice had taken on the careful tone adults used when they were lying to children, and Emma had always been good at hearing the difference. "The $2 million from the truck, Daddy. You wrote about it, about how you were going to take it and disappear so those men couldn't hurt us anymore." Emma's voice rose, each word calculated to push him toward the truth. "You said if anything happened, I should find Uncle Rico and tell him where you hid it." Tommy's grip on her shoulders tightened. "Emma, listen to me very carefully. Whatever you think you know, whatever you think you read, I know you killed those people to protect us." The words came out in a rush, and for a moment Emma wasn't sure if they were part of the script or her own desperate need to understand. "The man at the gas station, the woman who came to our house. You had to stop them, didn't you?" The silence stretched like a held breath. Tommy's eyes were bright with unshed tears, his face a map of 3 months' worth of guilt and desperation. When he finally spoke, his voice was broken glass. "I never wanted you to know about any of this. I thought if everyone believed I was dead, if I just disappeared with enough of their money to hurt them, you and your mom could be safe." His hands framed her face, thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize she was crying. "But they keep coming, don't they? They'll never stop coming. So you did take the money. It wasn't a question anymore. 2.3 million, to be exact. Enough to fund their next 3 operations. Enough to make them hurt." Tommy's laugh was bitter. "I thought I was so smart, staging the accident, making sure there was enough blood and wreckage to sell the story. But you always were too smart for your own good." Around them, the warehouse had filled with shadows that moved with too much purpose. Emma caught glimpses of tactical gear, the dull gleam of weapons. The FBI was closing in, and Tommy's associates were beginning to notice. "Where is it now, Daddy? Where's the money?" Tommy's eyes locked on hers, and in them she saw the moment he realized this wasn't the reunion he'd hoped for. His hand moved instinctively toward the gun at his hip, then stopped as red laser dots appeared on his chest. "Hello, Tommy," Detective Martinez said, stepping into the light with her weapon drawn. "Emma, step away from your father. Now. She's just a kid, Marcus. Let her go." That was Detective Morrison's voice, steady but strained. "A kid who's caused me nothing but trouble." Marcus Vega's reply was ice cold. "Because of her little outburst at that funeral, half my operation is blown. The FBI knows about the trafficking routes. My contacts are running scared, and I've got bodies piling up faster than I can bury them." Emma crept forward, staying low behind a stack of oil drums. Through the gaps, she could see her mother tied to a chair in the center of the warehouse, her face pale but defiant. Morrison stood nearby, his service weapon drawn but pointed at the floor. 3 of Vega's men flanked him, their guns trained on his chest. "The girl saw too much that night," Vega continued, pacing like a caged animal. "Her father was supposed to deliver those documents to the drop point, not hide them where his daughter could find them. Tommy always was too sentimental for his own good. He was trying to get out, Sarah spoke for the first time, her voice cracking. He wanted to protect Emma. That's why he took those photos, recorded those conversations. He was going to testify. Vega laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. Testify? Tommy was mine from the day he patched into the club. Blood in, blood out. He knew the rules. Emma's hand found the small digital recorder in her jacket pocket, the same one her father had used to document Vega's crimes. Morrison had given it to her before they'd walked into this trap, telling her to stay hidden no matter what happened. But seeing her mother tied up, seeing the guns pointed at the detective who'd become like family to them, Emma felt the same fierce courage that had made her scream the truth at her father's funeral. She pressed record. Where are the documents, Sarah? Vega's patience was wearing thin. Tommy hid them somewhere. The storage unit was empty. His apartment was clean. That leaves you and the girl. I don't know what you're talking about. Sarah's lie was transparent but brave. Vega nodded to one of his men, who stepped forward and backhanded Sarah across the face. The sharp crack echoed through the warehouse. Morrison tensed, raising his weapon slightly, but stopped when 3 gun barrels swung toward him. Easy, detective. Your turn is coming. Vega's smile was predatory. Did you really think I didn't know about your little investigation? That I wouldn't find out you've been working with the feds? Tommy wasn't the only one who got in too deep. Emma bit her lip to keep from crying out. Morrison had risked everything to help them, and now he was going to die because of it. She thought about her father's last words to her, whispered through the phone on his final night. Be brave, little bird. Sometimes being brave means doing the right thing, even when you're scared. The warehouse door on the far end creaked open, and more figures moved in the shadows. Emma's heart leaped, thinking it might be backup, but Vega's relaxed posture told her these were more of his people. The net was closing. Last chance, Sarah. Tell me where Tommy hid those documents, or Detective Morrison dies first, and we start looking for your daughter. And trust me, we will find her. Emma made her decision. She stood up from behind the oil drums, the recorder still running in her pocket. I have them. Every head in the warehouse turned toward her voice. Sarah gasped, Morrison cursed under his breath, and Vega's eyes lit up with dangerous satisfaction. There's our little bird. Vega's voice was silk over steel. Come here, Emma, nice and slow. Emma walked forward on trembling legs, but kept her chin up. Let my mom and Detective Morrison go. I'll tell you where the documents are. You're not in a position to negotiate, sweetheart. Vega gestured for her to keep coming, but I admire your spirit. Just like your father. My father was a good man who made mistakes. Emma stopped 10 feet away from Vega. But you're just evil. The slap came fast, snapping Emma's head to the side and bringing tears to her eyes. But she didn't fall, and she didn't cry out. The recorder kept running. Watch your mouth, little girl. Now, where are those documents? Emma looked at her mother, then at Morrison, and finally back at Vega. She could hear sirens in the distance, growing louder. Morrison must have found a way to signal for help. You want to know where they are? Emma's voice was steady despite her fear. They're already with the FBI. My dad mailed copies to 5 different agents before he died. And guess what else? She pulled the recorder from her pocket, holding it up like a weapon. You just confessed to everything. Vega's face went white with rage as the sirens grew deafening, and Emma finally understood what her father meant about being brave.